Calls for an inquiry into manufacturing have been rebuffed by the Prime Minister. That's enraged the unions and even some of her own backbench. But Julia Gillard says her focus is on action to protect jobs. The spotlight's fallen on the nation's manufacturing sector since Bluescope announced it's shedding more than 1,000 workers. Union leaders say it's a crisis and demands an industry overhaul. Hayden Cooper reports.
Australian manufacturing is in one of its worst situations it's been in ever. Australian steel is in its worst situation since we started making steel here in the Illawarra in 1928.
These are difficult days, but I am optimistic.
It's a story repeated over and again. Job losses, plant closures, and a sense of decline in the nation's foundries and factories. Prime Ministers have vowed to fight it.
I don't want to be Prime Minister of a country where we don't make things anymore.
I want us to be a nation that makes steel.
But none has found the solution to shield Australia's manufacturers from the worst the world can throw at them. Now, according to some, it's at crisis point.
If people don't think we're facing a crisis, if people don't think that we're in a bad time, they've got their heads in the sand. We are in a very bad state at the moment. 1,400 workers just down the road, a testament to how bad things are in Australian manufacturing.
Last week's retrenchment of 1,400 staff at Bluescope Steel in Wollongong has lit the touch paper on an always explosive issue. Today the Prime Minister was at Port Kembla to meet the workers themselves and to reassure them they'll get help from her government.
Nothing is more important to me as Prime Minister than protecting and supporting Australian jobs.
Since the tariff walls came down, it's become harder and harder for local manufacturers to survive. And it leaves governments with some difficult choices. Prop struggling companies up with industry welfare, or let the axe fall and step in afterwards to help re-skill and re-employ sacked workers. The unions want a much wider debate than that, starting with an inquiry, but they've failed.
Well, no, my focus is on action. I don't want to be held back from acting by an inquiry, which would inevitably take some time.
The union leaders suspect the nation's mining industry could do more to support local manufacturing by lifting the use of Australian-made steel. But the miners say it's already happening.
The unions are charging us with using a very small proportion of our components sourced here from Australia. That's wrong. We make up in excess of 50% of our steel is sourced from Australia. That's Australian Steel Institute figures.
Those figures are vastly different to the ones the unions are brandishing. The Minerals Council says in addition to the 53% of iron and steel that's sourced at home, a similar number applies for basic metal, structural metal and railway equipment. The same report says the total mining demand for goods and services in 2009 was $85 billion, of which $75 billion was sourced locally. At any rate, forcing miners to buy more Australian-made goods is impossible.
It would be actually against World Trade Organisation rules, and that matters because if we breach those rules, it's not some sort of esoteric theoretical matter, it's one that opens us up to retaliation.
So all the government can do is gently prod the miners towards buying Australian-made.
It is fair for our mining industry to be working out how they can best work with Australian manufacturers so they get a fair go during this process of expansion in Australian mining.
There we go. How about that?
In this tense political environment, charting a future for manufacturing is a task for the Alternative leader too, and Tony Abbott's intentions aren't entirely clear. On the one hand,
protectionist sentiment can't be shouted down or asserted away. It has to be argued against patiently, rationally.
But on the other, protectionism has its place.
If there's a respectable case that can be made for maintaining a heavy manufacturing base on the grounds of national security, the inherent value of a diversified economy, or the transitional costs of shutting down capital-intensive industries only to start them up again when market conditions change, there needs to be a forum where it can be addressed.
Mr Abbott is trying to be all things to all people. On this occasion, in one speech, he said he was a protectionist and also a free trader. He's Australia's first free trading protectionist.
It's an issue politicians have been arguing about for 100 years.
Hayden Cooper with that report.